different up there. Yeah, holy crap. Alright, so I want to start with a disclaimer here. This presentation, these topics that I've been exploring, these topics of ideology before, during, and after working on this presentation, they've been hard for me to swallow, and they're probably going to be very hard for you guys to swallow as well. So I hope I'm prepared to answer some of your questions. I hope you guys are prepared to ask some questions too. Thank you, Karen. I've been able to study like psychological literature on these ideas that I'm going to talk about today, as well as like history and anything along the humanities. So I have swallowed it in terms of books, but in the flesh, in terms of seeing people possessed by this ideology, I've only seen it on the screen. So I guess you could say only half swallowed it, but the idea here is something hard to swallow, so just be prepared for that. And to start with an understanding, a quote, this was from my previous boss. He said, "We usually forget that other people have intentions. So when you're on the road and someone cuts you off, just stop and think, there's more here than I know." And this is Earl Weber, it's from, he is a GM at a golf facility like that. So here's what we're talking about today. The intentions of the slaughterhouse versus the concentration camp. This is a case study on PETA's Holocaust on Your Plate initiative, and they compared slaughterhouses to concentration camps. They actually said all human beings in relation to animals are Nazis. So the idea is you have meat on your plate, you are a Nazi. And we're going to get into that today. And the second bullet point here is PETA's desperate attempt to comparing them. And that's simply part one. Part two is the radical philosophy of some PETA members and the radical philosophy of the Nazi ideation, how these philosophies are similar developmentally. And with that, we can get going here. So the words slaughterhouse and concentration camp have quite a bit in common, but the intentions of each are quite different. So People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals once put forth an initiative stating that they are intended for the same purpose. And this 2003 initiative challenges beliefs about the mindset of slaughterhouses. Certainly there is plenty of unethical treatment of animals within these slaughterhouses. However, to be told that the meat eaters of the world are indeed Nazis is quite a stretch. So PETA halted their initiative, and it ended with an apology to the Central Council of Jews in Germany the same year that this initiative even began. So just to review on slaughterhouses. They were first of all disgusting and appalling. That they are a systematic mechanism for our gradual survival. And I'm not interested in talking about how healthy eating meat is. That's a non sequitur for this topic. But they are not a systematic machination with the intention of making anything extinct. They are not genocidal, is what I'm trying to say. Ideology doesn't drive the will to survive on meat. The drive for nutrition does. So, now we have concentration camps. If you are familiar with the Nazi ideation, it does not include having meat on your plate. Far from it, actually. So what you are rather is a human being offering your body satisfaction and nutrition. What you are not is a human being offering a genocidal cleanse to the animals of the world, obviously. So there are cruel and unusual methods used in slaughterhouses, and some of these methods have to be reevaluated, and many are standard practice within ethical boundaries. Now, commonalities. First, we're going to go with the review here. So be them in Russia, China, or Germany, these concentration camps are so disgusting and appalling that many are afraid to talk about these things. There's a drive in every human being to remain pure of heart and mind, and I'll get into that later. But the goal here is to clear away a specific group from the face of the earth. It is commonly wrapped up in an ideology that does not see people as individuals in particular. So this is genocidal and is furthermore driven by doctrine. And I have a definition of genocide here from the Dictionary of Oxford Languages. It's the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. And of course, evil intentions play into this. So, there's a lot of ethical codes that were broken here. First of all, it's illogical But the others, PETA knew that they were doing this was unethical. They knew that the lie they got to tell, they knew the lie they got to tell for that year. And they broke honesty and expertise. They were dishonest due to the fact that they knew how outrageous their claims were. Their intention was to inspire people against slaughterhouses. This is deception through comparisons to the Nazi ideation. This indeed puts the nonprofit's expertise in question, as experts don't do this. So now it's not black and white. So there are some commonalities. We're going to get into that too. So both of these ideas, slaughterhouses and concentration camps, they have one thing in common. They both efficiently and dreadfully prepare for a future. And again, the difference is the intention. One future is for the continuation of the whole human race, and the other is for the discontinuation of certain groups of people. So slaughterhouses are not genocidal. That's clear. It is said, so they went even further to try and describe the slaughter mindset of, say, meat eaters or people who actively support slaughterhouses, say. So they say it is said that animals experience fear in the events leading up to their inevitable slaughter. This is from the article by Claire Robinson entitled, "Can Slaughter Truly Be Humane?" So the pigs are put in the cramped trucks without sustenance, and they know what's coming, she says. And without explanation, it can be observed that these conditions are like the ones in Nazi Germany. So once more, it must be emphasized that the intention is to continue humanity, or to preserve it, and corral the animals, keeping species alive. And now I in no way support this. I mean, if I were to see it, I'd probably cry. I get very emotional with these kind of things, so it's very hard for me to read this kind of stuff. But I do anyway, because I'm a journalist and this is what we do. We seek the truth, and this is very hard for me to do right now, just so you know. But however, it is difficult to leave it at simply corralling animals, because there's something else that motivates people to give up meat, and that's where we get into going vegan, right? So it is known that slaughterhouses workers can be afflicted with PTSD naturally. It is also known that the consumers can be afflicted all the same as well. So categorizing an animal as food can change our view of it until we see it being killed. This is what former PETA CEO Porva Joshipura explores this in her book entitled For a Moment of Taste, which is a pretty good title. This is known to be a reason for giving up meat, the ideology of veganism. And I'm in no way bashing or detesting veganism. I'm bashing the ideology of PETA members here, and Nazis. So there's certainly a psychological perspective here. Human beings have a high trait of disgust, and this is what I was talking about with the desire to remain pure of heart and mind. This is something social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has researched in many of his books, but The Righteous Mind is, goddamn, it's an important book to read, I'd say. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I see it all the time in bookstores. So blood, guts, and death are something most people would turn away from. So when something horrible is seen before your eyes, it can be traumatizing. And with that, there's a desire to remain pure of mind. So, conclusion to part one. Are people Nazis? In this article, intentions have been spoken about each part of the debate. The slaughterhouse has its intention in the benefit of providing human beings with nutrition, and the concentration camp intends to eradicate a certain type of peoples for the purpose of ideology. Slaughterhouses, on the other hand, have been standard practice, and it is thus so that they follow ethical code, such as studying the animal unconscious before its slaughter. Now, the Nazis have an ethical code too. They had one in the 40s, and they have one now. We're going to talk about the 40s one. And only they found it ethical. They believed the Jews were disgusting animals, and they described them as rats and pigs, and should die as such. So deception, torture, experiments, and cruel acts are the unethical differences compared to standard slaughterhouses. In the final comparison, both are high potential for disgust and fear. They are topics too frightening for most people to engage in, and there will always be a desire to remain pure of mind. So this is where we get to part 2 now. First of all, summation. These slaughterhouses are not genocidal, and concentration camps are built for that motivation in mind. Disgust can drive people against groups, even away from them, like a retreat into veganism. Intentions play a big part in assembling a case, and there's been a large misconstrue. I'm sorry, it's been forgotten. Intentions play a huge part in these kind of things, and they've been forgotten. So here's part 2. Now this is Jordan Peterson. He studied this in depth. He studied Browning's book, Ordinary Men, which describes well, it'll be in a video later, but he has the psychological literature, the humanities, all that kind of stuff. He's studied this very in depth for 20 years since he was 20. He's an expert on this, and furthermore, a psychologist, not a politician, as some people would believe. But he studied political motivations for this ideological, religious, and of course, psychological motivations for great evil in the world. And he has always been curious about this and deciphers it through stories of old, mythology, and history. As well as modern related renditions of these same stories, he also understands that there is a meta, an arc that swings through our culture and historical timeline. This has happened before, and it's not limited to landmass. So the philosophy that drove the Nazis has been used several times in the past, not just by Nazis. So it is no stranger to any other landmass. He confirms that human beings have the same potential for good and evil, and when you read hellish things like this, you're reading about everybody, including yourself. And this relates to journalism in a few ways, but it can be seen that this case defies the codes of honesty and expertise, of course. They knew their claims were false, and they used sensationalism to persuade this lie. They put their expertise in question as well with that. And what will inevitably happen if a philosophy like this infiltrates the people is it will get into the media, then it will be a topic of debate, and then we must hope that it will not get out of hand as it did in Russia, Germany, or China. So it must be emphasized right now that this philosophy of using disgust against, say, meat eaters or the Jews, the one in Nazi Germany is much higher of a degree. It was much further along than this one with PETA is now. So there's degrees here. There's not just intentions, there's degrees. And there is an old phrase as well, politics are local. It's never meant as much as that phrase never meant as much as it does now to me. If you look at it from this angle, you will see that all things begin from individuals, the local level, and then it moves into the macro, where it's not destined, but it could be plotted to be misconstrued through disinformation and misinformation. And then ethics will become misconstrued as well. So this is a little bit of a non sequitur here, but the 1% debate, it goes into this too. So once ethics are misconstrued, you can say at that point, good luck trying to persuade people to understand that they are resentful and it is wrong to be. We aren't at this point with the whole American 1% debate yet. That's the wealth, I mean. It's controversial, of course, and I try to carefully articulate my words as Dr. Peterson would. But the point is, the degree of the philosophy that drives people to radical objectives against the 1% was once at the same point, the same low point that it is now in America, in Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. And there's a lot of history on this. The fundamental idea in these societies is that a certain group must contain most of the wealth, and that the smaller groups, the more poorer groups, want to overthrow it. And this is how the Nazis thought, and so they acted in this way. First, it's a hope and a wish, but then it begins to sound reasonable, and then it finally delves into madness. There's intentions here too. There's a lot to be said for what drives people against groups. So you have, let's say Marxists. In the 60s, there was a time in college campuses where Marxism was taking hold again, but in America this time. And the motivations were far more present of disgust for the people who control the wealth than the support for the working class. In fact, in these protests, there was far more disgust than compassion. So there was a mask of compassion in the 60s. And of course, disgust is like the soul, it's the trait of disgust, the personality trait of disgust that drives this. And I wish I could go on with the connections of America, but that's not the assignment. I'm talking about PETA here. PETA for meat eaters. In ideological rages like these, it's typical to use words like snake or rat or bug. And I've added pig to this too, because that's also one. But these words portray disgust, and the psychologist Jonathan Haidt has devoted a deep amount of effort to understanding this trait. And disgust, when malevolently manipulated, can drive common people to slowly misconstrue their own beliefs against a powerful entity. For example, the instance of Hitler's persuasion of the infestation, right, of Jews in control of the wealth, or the infestation of meat eaters who support ethical slaughter, or the non sequitur, the infestation of the rich, 1% in control of the wealth. So, I have a video that can describe this slow developing kind of gradual possession of the mind. And Jordan Peterson talks about this this book called Ordinary Men, where he doesn't really buy into the fact that it's just following orders. It's a lot more than that. There's a misconstruing of morals that play into it as well. It's about 3 minutes.
Ordinary Men, that's a lot like that. I don't think I've mentioned that to you before, but Ordinary Men is a book about...
So why, I wonder why it's not coming up. Well, it's just him talking, you can listen to it. Hold on. We'll bring it back to this.
Of its type. Maybe it's the only book of its type. It's possible, but it's plotted much like Breaking Bad in some sense. It's a story about these German policemen in early stages of World War II. And they were guys who were old enough to be raised in Germany really before the Hitlerian propaganda came out in full force. If you were a teenager, say in the 1930s, you were going to be pulled right into the propaganda machine, and maybe you were part of the Hitler Youth, and like you were raised in that, But if you were older, then you were raised before that, and you're not as amenable to propaganda once you're older than about, well, I would say about 22 or something like that. It's pretty young, actually. If you're going to make a soldier, you have to get a soldier young, because once people are in their early 20s, say, they already have their personality developed. Anyways, these policemen were sent into Poland after the Germans marched through, and it was wartime, and there was this hypothesis in Germany that the Jews in particular were operating as a fifth column and undermining the German war effort, because of course the Germans blamed the Jews and a variety of other people for actually setting up the conditions that made the war necessary. And so when the police were sent into Poland, they were also required to make peace, roughly speaking. And so they started out by rounding up all the Jewish men between 18 and 65 and gathering them in stadiums and then shipping them off on the trains. But that isn't where they ended. They ended in a very, very dark place. I mean, these guys were going out in the field with naked pregnant women and shooting them in the back of the head by the end of their training. And what's really interesting about that is that their commander told them that they could go home at any time. So this is not one of those examples of people following orders. And the reason they didn't, roughly speaking, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons they didn't is because they didn't think it was comradely, so to speak, to leave the guys they were working with to do all the dirty work and run off. And that's really an interesting fact, because in different circumstances, you wouldn't think about that as reprehensible, right? You'd think, well, that's part of teamwork under rough circumstances, and that's at least in part how they viewed it. And they were also made physically ill multiple times, physically and psychologically ill by the things that they had to do, but they kept doing them anyways. So it's one step at a time, and that's the thing, is that you end up in very bad places one step at a time, so you've got to watch those steps.
I think that's the end of the video. Yeah. So, that's how ordinary men become evil. But the conclusion here is I want to first of all pause and address how crazy this sounds. First of all, we can agree that the case study in part one is bonkers. But how could slaughterhouses be the same as concentration camps? Obviously, that's not true. But it's much harder to understand this question. How can PETA's ideology or some of the politics of today be matched with the same as the Nazis? But that's the wrong question, because the right question is, how are the philosophies the same? And furthermore, how do they compare as they advance into their degrees of radicalism? And I'm certainly not saying that PETA is anywhere near the same philosophical degree that the Nazis got to in their prime. So, just to break this down, the comparison that PETA made is false and it defies ethical communicative codes of conduct. And it's not obvious to me that crimes against humanity only happen in certain countries and places. And as well, intentions play a big part in the behaviors and philosophies of slaughterhouses and concentration camps. And it's clear that the philosophies are the same, and how it takes baby steps to be indoctrinated. I open the floor to questions.
So Marco, when PETA launched that campaign that compared slaughterhouses to the Holocaust killing centers, there was quite a bit of blowback in Europe and even in Germany against the PETA campaign, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was shut down by the Central Council of Jews in Germany the same year it began. So they were embarrassed, to say the least.
Yet it seems like PETA has this philosophy that anything is ethical, any outrageous, provocative campaign that gets attention is ethical, because what we're trying to do here is to stop the slaughter of unwilling chickens or whoever, animals. So anything is acceptable. Is that, am I making this?
Yeah, yes. So,
anything's acceptable, anything is ethical, because what we're trying to do is stop the slaughter of animals who are used to feed people.
because it's, look how good we're being, look how moral we're being. And they're using that,
It's really an interesting idea.
The comparison to the pigs on a thing being compared to Jews on like a train is mind-boggling, because I can promise you, if you've ever been around a pig, they have no idea that they're no, they're just stomping in their own crap and sleeping in holes, and they don't care. And what would happen if you stopped eating meat? Like, there would be like an overpopulation of pigs. So quite frankly, when I'm eating bacon in the morning, I'm doing everyone a favor. So
yeah, you don't want an infestation of pigs.
right.
Is there a comparison here to the, I mean, we're in the middle of Michigan deer hunting season right now.
Right, and that's the most humane way to do it.
Is it?
You're catching your own food, and then you're,
Yeah. I mean, if there wasn't a culling, is culling a correct word? Is it, if there wasn't a culling of the deer herd, we'd be overrun by deer.
Yeah.
whitetail deer cause like the most deaths, I think it is, statistically, than any other animal, because of the
But
amount
if
of
that's
accidents.
But what you're saying is that the slaughterhouses, which are designed,
For the purpose of genocide.
of a species, that's fair.
Yeah, it's not fair that they use the whole Nazi debate. I mean, there's no, we don't learn about the Soviets, we don't learn about China, Mao's China. All three of these countries, in particular, destroyed their own history. Whether it was, the Nazis, they destroyed new history because they lean conservatism. And China and Russia destroyed their old history because they were liberal, communistic. So it's good to have a variety of information when instead all you have is, oh, the Nazis, but should do a lot more reading, is what I'm saying. A lot more reading is required for this. But yeah, that's all I have to say. If there's any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Did you say that most people who work in slaughterhouses stop eating meat when they get meat?
Perhaps it's like that.
I'm just curious if they quit their jobs or they themselves stop eating meat
Oh,
because
the
they're
PTSD.
personally seeing it versus all of us in this room. We just don't understand what's actually happening there and how animals are being treated. So we can say whatever, but you don't see it firsthand.
No, you don't. And to go back to the book that Peterson was talking about, with PTSD, you get PTSD. It's, you work in a slaughterhouse, and this is just a hypothetical, right? Perhaps you won't quit because you're agreeable and you don't want to abandon your team, say, to do these horrible acts, so you become indoctrinated, it's the wrong word, you become slowly possessed by the fact that this is okay, that on an individual level, this is okay for my own character to kill animals all day.
I'm reminded, this is related, but I'm reminded that some journalists have been arrested for sneaking into slaughterhouses, into cattle operations, and documenting how the mistreatment of animals, and I know some states, even I think Texas, maybe Iowa, have made that kind of reporting illegal.
Going in and sneaking in?
Yes, I think in many instances the journalists got the information using deceptive tactics, but what they're reporting is true.
Yeah, so it's the same concept as in court, you don't, evidence isn't permissible and you obtain your belief, so you can't use it.
Both sides breaking the rules.
Thanks, Marco, for a thought-provoking case.
Well,
I love Jordan Peterson, he's very motivating. Very wordy.
All right, with that, Thanksgiving is close. Enjoy the holiday break, and we have one more class session